Greetings and salutations, everybody. I say that because I see that we have people from all over the world, so I can't say good morning or afternoon. My name is Glenn Schwartzberg with interRel Consulting, and I've been doing Essbase since about 1992. Doesn't mean I'm any good at it, it just means I'm really old. So today what we're going to talk about is the tools necessary to drill through to Essbase in Essbase 19c. There's a couple of slides here about interRel. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes on a advertisement for interRel. I'm just going to kind of skip these, but they will be in the deck when you want to see them later. So basically, what is drill through? People confuse it with drill down, but drill through really is the ability to retrieve data from a relational source or from a URL source while you're in an Essbase retrieval in SmartView. So what are the types of data that we could be getting? We could be getting additional information that's not in the cube. For example, if we're on a customer, we can get their address, phone number, contact information, line of credit information, their outstanding balance, all of that kind of information. If we're on a store, we might be able to get, who the store manager is, the regional manager, the open date, square footage, things that we typically wouldn't be storing in an Essbase cube. And we can also get more detailed information. So for example, in a GL cube, where we might be loading a GL balance, and we want to see the journal entries that make up that balance. Or again, if we're on a customer, maybe we want to see all of the invoices that they have outstanding and the detail of those invoices. Now, drill through has been around for quite a long time in different forms. So the first one that we had when we used the Excel add-in long ago and far away, and it was a client-side drill through. Most people don't even remember it. So basically what you could do is you could create a query within your add-in interface, and it was messy because it was extremely high maintenance. It wasn't very efficient. It was actually hard to do. They improved that by going to EIS, Essbase Integration Services, and they made it better because it was now a server-side drill through as opposed to a client-side, and you had reusable components and other things. They improved it even more when they went to Essbase Studio. I consider EIS to Essbase Studio a continuum. Essbase Studio really was the next incarnation of EIS. And finally, we get to 19c. Now, I could say OAC/19c because they're extremely similar. There are just some limitations in OAC that you don't have in 19c. So as I was talking to one of the Oracle development team, they consider it to be pure goodness. And we'll see how that rates up to its standing. So let's talk a little bit about Essbase Studio versus this native drill through in 19c and what some of the differences are. And this could be related to EIS as well, but it's mostly Essbase Studio that I'm comparing it to because I wrote the book on Essbase Studio, so I know more about it. So connections, in Studio we were using mostly ODBC connections. In this native drill through we're using mostly JDBC connections. If we want to build dimensions, we have to build a whole model in Essbase Studio, and we create them in what are called hierarchies. And the hierarchies are just relationships between columns in the data. In native Essbase, we use just standard load rules with what we call connections, and I'll show you this all in a little while. Not the creation of the load rule, but the connection. And basically, we just supply our columns there, and we use either the connection and the data source, and I'll talk about what those mean in a little while, in the load rule, or we can also use a SQL statement in there. Things about dimensions from Studio: we could not edit the load rules when we were in EAS, Essbase Administration Services. We had to do all of the management through Essbase Studio. In native Essbase in 19c, it's completely editable. When we're loading data, we could let Studio build our data load rule, which was always a bad idea, or we could create custom SQL in order to do it. Similarly, we're using SQL-based load rules in 19c. Automation, here's where I think Studio had a little bit of an advantage. We had the deploy command in there, which basically bundled all of your dimension build and data load rules into a single command and allowed you to have one step in MaxL. With 19c, we're going to be using regular MaxL, so individual import statements for data, maybe one or more import statements for our dimension builds. Drill through, which is what we're really talking about today, had lots of limitations, especially if you were trying to get from the very top of a dimension, if you wanted to be very specific about intersections that you were drilling in on, had a lot of limitations. This 19c has a lot more functionality, which you'll see once I actually get into the demos of this. So what are the steps to create a drill through? Well, first of all, I have to tell you that there are two types of drill through. The first one is to a relational source, and that's what we're going to concentrate on today. I will show you how to do a drill through to a URL, but it's not the main topic of this discussion today. So I've got about 92 slides that we can go through in order to show this, but I like to live dangerously. So I am going to do a live demo of this and show you everything that I know and don't know, but I do have the slides as a backup just in case. So I'm going to turn off my presentation. And if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A window. And the very first question that I have is, can we get the slides? And all of the slides and presentations are being recorded, and everybody who is attending today's sessions will get links to everything. So let me go into my Essbase instance, and this is the Essbase instance that I'm using, and we're going to use this application called Solutions Drill Through today. And I just renamed Sample Basic, so it really is nothing more than Sample Basic. And on top of that, what we're going to be drilling through to is this table in my AWS instance that is called Drill Through Dataset. And you can see here, I've got a product, a market. Now notice the market is not the individual market. I've got a year, I've got a scenario, I've got an amount, I've got my state, and I've got a whole bunch more metrics here. So we're going to be able to drill through on this table right here. Now, one of the advantages here is obviously this is a single table, but I could use a view, I could join to get multiple tables. the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a data source connection. So I'm going to the sources tab here. Now, I can do this here and make it a global connection, which means that all of the applications can get to it. Or if I go back, and when I'm on Zoom for some reason, my screen is really slow. Come on. This is being persnickety here. Let's do this again. Yeah, the love of live demos. Where is it? Come on. We can do it. Maybe we will be going to slides. Come on, I'll give it one more second. If it doesn't work, I'm going to go to the slides. Oh no. Why is my server not found? Okay. So obviously I'm having some sort of issue, so we're going to use slides as a backup. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into sources and we're going to try and create a connection. And so there are different kinds of connections I could connect to: our Oracle database, Essbase, a file, Spark, DB2, SQL Server, MySQL, and based on which one we select, we're going to get a dialog box that allows us to connect to that one. If I'm doing an autonomous database in the cloud for Oracle, I can select here, and instead of the host, it's going to give me my ability to upload a wallet file. So we can use these connections for more than just drill through reports. We can use them for filters. We can use them for doing dimension and database data load rules, and a whole bunch of other things down the road. Right now, these are the things that we can connect to. If you have another database like Snowflake or the like, it is currently not being supported, but it doesn't mean that there won't be in the future with the ability to add in ODBC connections on the server itself. Now, if I'm connecting to an on-prem database, I need to have either a VPN or a fast connect installed. If I'm doing this in OAC Essbase, I can't do a VPN, so I only have the ability to get to cloud databases or a database that you have made accessible to the world, which most people won't do. So after we've created and tested our connection, what we're going to do is we're going to create a data source. And you can see here that there's multiple tabs for my data source. The first one, the general one, is what we're going to do is we're going to decide which connection that we created that we're going to use. And based on the connection type, the bottom part will change. If it's a flat file, it'll ask about which columns, that kind of thing. If it's relational, then we're going to do a SQL query in here. I'm going to do a SQL query. If we're actually connecting to another Essbase cube, it would be using MDX. So we're going to name it up here, and then we're going to add our query information and do anything we want. Here's one that here's the flat file data source down here. The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to get a listing, and it's reading. If this is relational, it's actually doing a display of the DDL in order to get the columns that we have in our source, and it's going to go through and it's actually going to figure out what it thinks the data type should be. And it's going to use the data source type as well to do that. But sometimes we need to overrule it. So for example, I might have a customer number that is purely numeric and it thinks that it should be a double. But really it's a dimension member name, so we can convert it to a string in here. We can do things with date time if it's a long, that type of thing. The next one that we see is parameters. I'm going to get into this later. Most likely you're not going to use it. There is a really good use case for it that I'll talk about later. Then what happens is we get a sample of our data. And so, So here what we're seeing is what our data looks like. Now this happens to be a different thing from the data that I showed you, but it's going to be the same type of information. Now, even though we were able to get our columns based on our SQL query and the like, once in a while when you go to preview it, you'll get errors. So for example, two columns names are being named the same. And what will happen is at the top of the screen, you'll get an error about that. So you're going to want to go back to general, clear up those errors. And then once you have a clean look at the data, we can create this data source. So, and we can also look at the data to see if it's the data that we expect. Now, I'm going to go back here for just a second. The way you do your query is the column order that you're going to want the columns to return in a drill through report, because it's going to take the column order that you've specified. So once you've done that, then the next thing that we're going to want to do is create the drill through report itself. And the drill through report is tied to a database. And what the drill through report is going to give us is it defines what columns in our source relate to what dimensions are in our cube. So basically we're doing a column mapping to say this column in my source relates to this dimension in my database. The second thing that we're going to define is the intersection of data that users are allowed to drill through from. So getting into this, so talking about the column mapping. So what we do here, as you can see in my picture, is we're going to give this a name that we're going to use for our drill through. Then we're going to give it what our data source is that we're using in order to do this drill through. And what it will do is it will return all of the columns that were in that SQL from that data source. And even though we might have 20 columns in our data source, we might not want to use all of them. We might only want to use a subset of those columns. So what we do is we define which columns we want in this drill through report. Then we have this dimension generation filter condition. So in this case, my product dimension is going to map to the product dimension in Essbase. And what we're going to do is we're going to define what level of data we're going to connect to. There's another little drop-down area over here that I forgot to put in that you don't see that will give us whether or not it's level 0 members or a generation member. So for my example, Product is going to map to my product dimension, and it's going to map to level 0 members. And what that means is it doesn't matter what level of data I am in Essbase, Essbase is always going to return the level 0 members under it. So for example, if I'm in my year dimension, which has quarters and months, if I were at Q1, when it's trying to do the join, it's going to join on Jan, Feb, and March from my sample basic cube. Now, in my case of market dimension, remember I showed you before that I had market, the market was east, west, north, and south, which is my generation 2 in my Essbase cube. So I would say that this is part of the market dimension, and instead of saying level 0 members, I'm going to say it's going to be generation 2. So it's going to do a one-to-one mapping that says if I'm on Gen 2, then use this column. My state name is my Gen 3, which is called state name. So if I'm on my generation 3, it's going to map to that column instead. Now that works really well if you have balanced hierarchies. We all know that Essbase doesn't have very many balanced hierarchies. So what I find is about 90% of the time, we're going to use the connection to level 0 members. I guess I already had said that. Okay, so I actually did have a picture of this. So you can see here, in my product dimension, I've chosen it to match to product, and I'm telling it that I'm going to map to the level 0 members because I always wanted to return the individual SKU numbers. And I don't have multiples. So market is going to be going to my generation 2 of market, that type of thing. So, and that this is actually wrong because I needed to map state, and I actually found this when I was playing with it. I needed to map state to my Gen 3 and market to my Gen 2. Now, if I just tried to save this right now, it's going to give me an error telling me I don't have any drillable regions created. So this is just telling me what columns I'm going to return and how they map. Next, we have to say, where are we allowed to drill through from? And that's where the drillable regions comes in. So what we're going to do is we're going to use CalcScript language in order to define the different intersections. So similar to how we do filters. And if you leave out a dimension completely, it assumes all members of that dimension. So how do we do it? What we do is, and let me just see if yep. So how do we do it? What we do is we click on the plus sign, and then we double click in this drillable region. And we can create multiple drillable regions within here. So for example, I created a drillable region that said, in the accounts dimension, you have to be on the member called sales. And it only is applicable for the scenario of actual. So right here, you can see that this is more functional than Essbase Studio was, because in Essbase Studio, you couldn't select specific members or parts of a dimension. You could just say, I want it to be on Gen 2 of scenario, which would mean both actual and budget. So I'm going to say that I'm going to drill through on sales, on my actual scenario, and I have to be at any level of the product dimension, but I have to be at the member called market in my markets dimension. So at the top of the dimension. And then maybe I add a second drillable region that says for cost of goods sold, or COGS, for the budget scenario, that I have to be at a month level, and I have to be at an individual market, but I could be at any level of the product dimension. So that's going to give me different regions based on where I am in my cube on allowing what it's going to be able to do the drill through. So once we create it, so you can see here sales, actual New York, actual COLAs, and we could assign multiple ones. This is another region I defined. Once I save it, the drill through report is available immediately to all users. So they'll see the drill through report if they're on a proper intersection. You don't have to log out and log back in. You don't have to flip any switches, any of that. It's going to all be there right away. So here we can see, in my case, I had sales, actual, the descendants of year, the descendants of product and market. And then for COGS, I didn't even include year because I didn't need to. The budget, the descendants of market, and I had to be at the top of product. And that's going to create my drill through report. So the report now is available to us. So what are we going to do in order to do that drill through? So in Excel, we're going to retrieve the cube, obviously. And when we get to an intersection where drill through is allowed, and I'm going to actually see if Smart View is working here. I'm going to go to a private connection, log in, wish me luck. See if we can get to the cube. It always takes me 2 times to type in my, oh, I can't spell my name. Okay, and because I didn't actually build the drill through report here, I'm going to use my backup version of this, which is in Sample Basic. And it's got to start up my cube because it's been down for a while. Come on. For some reason, when I'm on Zoom, everything is much slower. Okay. So we're just going to do sales and COGS. Get rid of those 2. And we're going to do keep only on budget and actual. And pivot those. And we're going to drill in on product and drill in on market. And so you can see here what I get is well, that's a URL drill through, which I don't want. So I think I said that I had to be at market for actuals. So you can see I get 2 different drill through reports here. I get one that we'll talk about in a little while, and I get my drill detail. So if I click here, now one of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come into the Smart View option under Advanced, and you're going to want to turn on that display of drill through tips. So here I can either double click, and because I have multiple reports, it's giving me the choice of which one I want to do. So I'm going to do this one, launch it. What it will do is it will open up a new tab, I hope. Haven't had a chance, there we go. And it's going to return the data that I had asked for. And you'll notice that if I go into budget, I'm only getting that URL drill through because I said that I had to be at the top of product. So if I come here, oh, I think I might have had to be at product, that one. Oh, it's not working because I needed to be on COGS. There we go. Now I get the same report, but it's going to return different information for me. So in a second, there we go. It's going to return. So you can see now I'm getting my budget and it's specific to the intersections that I had requested. So very simple to do a drill through. And as I said, if we had multiple reports, which I showed, then you're going to get a selection box to say which report do you want. And it was always going to open up a new tab. So every drill through report is going to be a separate tab. So a couple of things. Remember in tips and trick, or in the data source, I said that we had that thing called parameters, and you're most likely not going to use them. Their use isn't even documented. I had to talk with development and find out how to use this. And I have found since I put this together that you can use the REST API in order to update this. So how do we do this? So in our SQL statement, what we do is instead of putting in a hard-coded value, we put in a question mark. And what will happen is once we do that, once we go to the parameters tab, we're going to get a list of question marks. And it's going to go through this in the order that it finds the question marks, and it's going to create a param1, param2, param3. In my case, I only had one parameter, and so I'm saying where the value is equal to Jan. So if I wanted to have my SQL be able to do an incremental load of only the latest month's worth of information, I could use this parameter. And using a REST API call before I ran my data load rule, I could then use the REST API call to update this. Maybe I want to change it from January to February. And so I can use that in order to change the parameters. Even if I'm doing something with a drill through report, maybe that I want to change what this default parameter is every month so they're getting the latest month's worth of data, that type of thing. So we can do that. So you can see here, when I went to my preview, it was just January data. If I changed it back to February and went to the preview, then I'm only going to see the February data. So I've been talking mostly about drilling through to a URL, and I'm just curious to see if my instances. So it's going to let me connect in now. I don't know what the issue was. So in addition to drilling in to a database, you can also drill to a URL. So I'm going to use my backup version here. And what I was going to show you early on is if I wanted to make the source application specific, I can do it in here other than doing it here globally. So if I wanted to have different queries and the like, or if I wanted to segregate them out, I can do them this way. But I'm going to come here and inspect the database, and I'm going to go to scripts. And you can see here are my drill through reports here. Now here's the drill example that I had created earlier, the one that we were actually using. But I'm going to close this one out, and I'm actually going to go to the URL one. And here's another undocumented feature. So I can go to any URL that I want as long as I have access to it. And if I want to pass parameters, we use the old Essbase Studio nomenclature. So if I wanted to pass the market, for example, here, I would use the $ market dash value, and it is case sensitive, so be careful about that. And that would pass in the market value in here. And then I created this drillable region, and I basically said, well, I want to be anywhere in the cube. The reality is I probably need to be in my market dimension, and I could use at level members or at relative or whatever, but I'm going to need to be at an individual market because those are the states, and it wouldn't know, in this case I'm going to weather.com timeanddate.com, it wouldn't know what east meant. So I'm going to save and close that. So now if I come back to Smart View here, and I go down to, if I go to Massachusetts, and I say that I want to do a URL drill through. So you can see what it did is it went here and it passed Massachusetts into this query, and that's what I got as my return. Now, obviously, you're going to have to put this in the right format for whatever the website is. So you could put in pluses and other things to add in multiple dimensions, that type of thing. And I did find that when I tried to test it for New York, that I ran into problems because it doesn't understand New plus York. So I didn't spend the time yet to figure out what the syntax I would need to do in order to do that type of drill through. So let's see. Okay. So what about security on here? Well, you remember that when I created the connection, I was using a generic ID here, basically an ID that had access to everything in that view and table. But what happens if I don't have access to an intersection, either read or meta read? What happens is the drill through icon does not appear and the drill through will be disabled. So I'm going to log out here, and I'm going to go ahead and reconnect, and I'm going to be set up as a test user because this is how I did it. And I'm going to go ahead and log on. And I'm going to refresh. And you'll notice that I only have access to West. I don't have access to anything else. So if I think it's here, see how I have a drill through report for West. But if I go anywhere else, I don't get that icon and I can't do a drill through report. If I tried to force it, let's try that one. And I go to drill through, it tells me that there's no drill through report found at this location. But if I come, I can't even do the drill through for actuals because I need to be at the member called market. I can only drill through to budget at this point. So now I could drill through to budget, and I will only get those intersections of data. So I'm pretty secure. Now, what it does mean is that when you create your drillable region and what you create the columns that are being returned, you have to make sure that if I only have access to West, first that I create the connection for those columns in that dimension, so it looks at West and says, okay, he can only, he can only drill in on West. And then in my data source, I need to make sure that I don't include any columns that I would not want them to see. And what I actually did at one client is they only wanted to have like 3 or 4 users have access to employee level data. So I was very specific that in my selection criteria for the drillable regions that they had to be on a very specific member, or it would not let them ever do the drill through to that report. So a lot of feature, a lot of functionality in here. And they have to, I was a little concerned about security, but they've made it pretty good. So I've got about 4 minutes for questions. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A window and I'll see if I can answer them. So our Essbase Studio drills goes against stored procedures. Do I know if it's going to be continued to be supported? And the answer is it currently is not supported. That doesn't mean it won't be in the future. If you have a specific use case for it, let me know. I talk to the development team all the time, and I can plead the case for you. The next question is, whoops. Is there any limitation to the number of rows records that can be retrieved? Well, obviously, there is a limitation in Excel of 1.6 million rows that you wouldn't be able to get more than that. Frankly, to me, drill through is not meant to be a data dump that somebody is using to feed another system or do something else. It really should be used for doing analysis. And if you've got 1.6, million rows of data, you're not going to be able to do a very easy analysis on that. That's me being on my soapbox. I apologize, but you should try to limit it to be reasonable amounts. Do we have limitations with the size of the SQL written in the back end? For instance, if you drill from very high, you get the SQL written with more than 1,000 members in the in clause. It causes drill through to fail. So that was actually fixed in Essbase Studio. What they did is they created multiple in clauses, and 19c drill through is doing something very similar. So you should not run into that issue. One of the things you can actually do if you want to try doing drill through, let me come back here. One of the really nice things that Oracle did is in the file system of an OAC instance, in the gallery section, they created a bunch of technical applications, including one that's drill through. And so they actually have a data set that you can do drill through to. I can come here and I can create this database. Come on, open up. Is it there? No. Do it the hard way. Download. Oh, that's why. It's because I had it hidden. So one of the things that they've done is they've created, so here's actually an example. And in the README, it walks you through everything that you need to do in order to try drill through yourself. Now this is to a flat file, it's not to a relational database, but it gives you the idea of how drill through works. And one of the things that they actually have in here is some sample queries. So for example, you can actually do a drill. There's an example in here to do a drill through from the top of the dimensions. This was a big issue in Essbase Studio, and it's no longer an issue here. So hopefully that answers your question, Nick. Do partitions work with a drill through cube? Amit, I have to tell you, I have no idea. I would guess that the answer would be yes, because you would be creating your drill through on the target of a partition. So you would be able to see data and you would have the definitions in there as well. So I'm guessing that, that they will work. You can actually even do a drill through to another Essbase cube using MDX. So you can go multiple ways. So I'm just about out of time. Hopefully I've answered all of your questions. If you do have more, please email me at gschwartzberg@interrel.com. If you can't remember that, then try info@interrel.com. And I would like to thank you for joining me today, and have a great rest of the conference.